The scream, high-pitched and abruptly cut short, was a sound that would forever be seared into Captain Tom Shelton's memory, a razor blade slicing through the mundane Saturday afternoon sounds of lawnmowers and distant children's laughter. He was in the garage, tinkering with the charging mechanism of his daughter Lily's spare wheelchair battery when he heard it. Lily. He dropped the multimeter, his blood turning to ice water in his veins, and sprinted towards the front of the house, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He burst out the front door, and his world tilted a nauseating, horrifying lurch. Lily, his bright 10-year-old Lily, was on the aluminum access ramp that led to their porch, her small body rigid, convulsing her eyes wide with a terror he had never seen before. Her hands were clamped onto the metal handrails, her knuckles white. A faint, acrid smell like burnt ozone stung his nostrils. Electricity. Tom, captain of the city's electrical safety police, reacted on pure ingrained instinct, his professional training overriding the tidal wave of parental panic that threatened to drown him. Lily let go. He roared, but her muscles were locked, the current coursing through her. He couldn't touch her, not directly, not while she was a conduit. His eyes darted around, spotting a dry, wooden rake leaning against the porch. He grabbed it, his movements a blur, and with a desperate, forceful jab, hooked the non-conductive wood around Lily's arm, prying her hand free from one rail, then the other. She collapsed onto the ramp, a boneless heap. The convulsions stopped. Tom tossed the rake aside, his gaze, sweeping the ramp, the underside of the porch, searching for the source, his mind a furious engine of calculation. He saw it, a thin, almost invisible wire snaking from the junction box of the outdoor porch light, down along a support beam and making direct, undeniable contact with the metal underside of the ramp. It was crudely, amateurishly, but lethally done. Deliberate. His wife, Sarah, burst out of the house, her face a mask of confusion quickly morphing into horror. Tom. What happened, Lily? Call 911. Tell them electrocution, child. Then hit the main breaker in the garage now, Tom commanded, already kneeling beside Lily, his fingers searching for a pulse at her neck. It was there, thready, terrifyingly weak. Her skin was clammy, her lips tinged blue. He checked her airway, his movements swift, practiced from years of emergency response training, though never ever had he imagined performing them on his own child. He began chest compressions, counting under his breath, his world narrowed to this single desperate task, keeping his daughter alive. The acrid smell of ozone still hung in the air, a sickening perfume of malice. And as he worked, a single name, a single face burned itself into his mind with cold, incandescent fury: Janice Pruitt, head of their homeowners association. The woman who had waged a relentless, vindictive war against Lily's ramp since the day they'd installed it. The questions of who and why were already coalescing into a horrifying certain answer. Tom Shelton's life was defined by two unwavering poles: his love for his family and his dedication to electrical safety. As captain of the city's electrical safety police, a specialized unit within the broader police force, he'd seen firsthand the devastating consequences of faulty wiring negligence and, on rare disturbing occasions, deliberate sabotage. His team investigated electrical accidents, enforced safety codes, and worked to educate the public about the invisible dangers that lurked within their walls and appliances. He was a man who understood the lethal power of electricity, its unforgiving nature, and he had dedicated his career to taming it, to protecting others from it. His daughter Lily was the radiant center of his universe. A diving accident when she was 6 had left her with a spinal cord injury, confining her to a wheelchair. But Lily, with a spirit as bright and resilient as her name, had refused to be defined by her limitations. She was sharp, funny, an avid reader, and possessed an artistic talent that filled their home with colorful paintings. Tom and Sarah had poured their love and resources into making their modest suburban house on Sycamore Drive a haven for her, a place where she could be independent, comfortable, and happy. The aluminum ramp, wide and gently sloping, leading to their front porch, was her lifeline to the world, a symbol of her freedom and their unwavering commitment to her needs. It had been professionally installed, meeting all ADA specifications, a sleek, functional structure that blended as well as possible with their well-kept but unpretentious home. Sarah, Tom's wife, was a graphic designer who worked from home, her schedule flexible enough to accommodate Lily's needs and school routines. She was Tom's rock, his partner, in navigating the complexities of Lily's care, their love, a quiet, steady force against the challenges they faced. Together, they had created a life filled with laughter, warmth, and an unspoken fierce protectiveness for their daughter. Sycamore Drive, part of the larger Oakwood Hills Homeowners Association, was on the surface the epitome of suburban tranquility. Tree-lined streets, neat houses, the distant hum of family life. But beneath this placid exterior, a current of discord flowed, largely emanating from one source, Mrs. Janice Pruitt, the self-appointed guardian of Oakwood Hills' aesthetic purity and the iron-fisted president of its HOA. Janice Pruitt lived 3 houses down from the Sheltons, in a sprawling, ostentatiously grand house with an immaculately manicured lawn that looked like it was tended by a team of surgeons rather than gardeners. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a tightly permed helmet of blonde hair, a perpetually pursed expression, and eyes that seemed to miss nothing, especially if it deviated from her narrow definition of acceptable. Her reign as HOA president had been marked by a proliferation of nitpicky rules, selectively enforced, and a general atmosphere of low-level intimidation directed at anyone who dared to challenge her authority or her vision for Oakwood Hills. From the moment the Sheltons had submitted their plans for Lily's ramp, Janice Pruitt had made her opposition vehemently publicly known. A ramp, she'd exclaimed at the HOA meeting where the plans were presented, her voice dripping with disdain. Captain Shelton, surely you understand that such a structure will be an absolute eyesore. It will drastically alter the character of your property and, by extension, negatively impact the property values of everyone on Sycamore Drive. This is a neighborhood of distinction, not a clinic. Tom, struggling to maintain his composure, had patiently explained. Mrs. Pruitt, this ramp is a medical necessity for my daughter. It will be professionally installed, aesthetically unobtrusive, and fully compliant with all city codes and ADA regulations. Her quality of life, her ability to access her own home, is not negotiable. Quality of life is one thing. Captain Pruitt had retorted, her voice hardening, but the financial well-being and aesthetic integrity of this entire community is another. There are rules, Captain Shelton, standards. Perhaps a different, less visible solution could be found. A rear entrance, perhaps. A rear entrance, Tom knew, would involve a much longer, more convoluted path for Lily, isolating her from the front of the house, from the street, from the very neighborhood Pruitt claimed to be protecting. It was an unfeeling, impractical suggestion designed to marginalize his daughter. The HOA board, largely cowed by Pruitt, or sharing her superficial concerns, had initially balked at approving the ramp. It had taken a strongly worded letter from Tom's lawyer, citing federal disability discrimination laws, and a tense private meeting, where Tom had laid out the potential legal and financial consequences for the HOA for Pruitt to grudgingly, resentfully concede. The ramp was approved, but it was clear that Janice Pruitt considered it a personal defeat, a blight on her perfect neighborhood, and she was not one to forget or forgive. The inciting incident, the moment that signaled Pruitt's shift from simmering resentment to active targeted harassment over the ramp, occurred a month after its installation. Lily, with newfound joy, was finally able to wheel herself in and out of the house independently, her laughter echoing as she raced Tom down the driveway to the mailbox. Pruitt, witnessing this scene from her porch, her face a mask of thunderous disapproval, had apparently decided that direct confrontation was necessary. Later that week, an official-looking envelope arrived from the Oakwood Hills HOA. Inside was a formal notice of violation, citing a newly minted bylaw, one Tom was certain hadn't existed a week prior, regarding unapproved exterior modifications visible from the street that detract from the uniform aesthetic of the community. The notice specifically mentioned the excessive metallic glare of the aluminum ramp and demanded that it be painted a muted HOA-approved earth tone within 14 days or face daily fines of $50. She can't be serious, Sarah had said, rereading the notice with disbelief. Paint the ramp. It's aluminum for safety and durability. Painting it will make it slippery when wet, and it will chip and peel. It's ridiculous. Tom's jaw tightened. It's more than ridiculous, Sarah. It's harassment. She's deliberately creating rules to target us to make Lily's life more difficult. He knew that painting the ramp would not only be a maintenance nightmare, but could also compromise its non-slip surface, a critical safety feature. And the metallic glare was a complete fabrication. The ramp had a brushed, non-reflective finish. He immediately contacted the HOA management company and then Puit directly to protest the violation notice. The management company, clearly taking its cues from Puit, was unhelpful. Puit herself was smug and unyielding. The rules are the rules. Captain Shelton, she'd said, her voice laced with false sympathy when he finally got her on the phone. We must maintain standards. Surely a can of paint is not too much to ask for the sake of neighborhood harmony, unless, of course, you'd prefer to consider alternative access solutions. Her implication was clear: get rid of the ramp or comply with her increasingly arbitrary demands. This notice was the first shot in a new, more aggressive phase of Puit's war. Tom, through another legal letter, pointed out the discriminatory nature of the new bylaw and the safety hazards inherent in painting the ramp. The fines were eventually grudgingly rescinded, but Puit's animosity only deepened. The battle lines had been drawn. Lily's ramp was not just a ramp, it was a symbol of defiance against Janice Puit's tyranny. The campaign of harassment escalated with a chilling, calculated pettiness. Janice Puit seemed to dedicate an inordinate amount of her time to finding new ways to make the Sheltons' lives, and particularly Lily's, use of the ramp miserable. The first truly shocking incident beyond the bogus violation notices was an act of deliberate obstruction. One morning, as Sarah was about to take Lily to a doctor's appointment, they found a row of heavy, oversized terracotta planters filled with thorny rose bushes placed directly at the foot of the ramp, blocking access from the driveway. The planters hadn't been there the night before. They were undeniably Puit's. Tom recognized them from her own elaborate front porch display. There was no note, no explanation, just the silent, aggressive barrier. It took Tom, his muscles straining, a good 15 minutes to move the heavy planters far enough to allow Lily's wheelchair to pass. Lily, watching him, her small face etched with confusion and a dawning understanding of Puit's malice, had been quiet and subdued all the way to the doctor. She's trying to make it impossible for Lily to use the ramp, Sarah had said, her voice trembling with suppressed anger when Tom got home that evening. What kind of person does that to a child, Tom? Tom, his own anger, a cold, hard knot in his stomach, had marched down to Puit's house. She'd answered the door, her expression one of bland innocence. Mrs. Puit. Tom had said, his voice tight but controlled. Your planters were blocking my daughter's ramp this morning. I expect it not to happen again. Puit had feigned surprise. My planters. Oh dear, how could they have gotten there? The wind perhaps, or mischievous children. I certainly didn't put them there. Captain, though, she added, her eyes glinting, one does hear that such ramps can be an invitation for unwelcome nocturnal activities. Perhaps some strategically placed decorative elements might deter such things. Her insinuation was vile, her denial paper-thin. The next escalation was more insidious, aimed at creating an atmosphere of fear and unease. Puit began a campaign of what could only be described as surveillance and intimidation. She would often be seen standing on her own porch or ostensibly weeding her front flower beds, her gaze fixed on the Sheltons' house whenever Lily was coming or going. If Lily was outside enjoying a bit of sunshine on the porch, Puit would make a point of walking past, slowly, her stare unwavering, making Lily deeply uncomfortable. She also started to verbally accost Sarah when Tom wasn't home. If Sarah was helping Lily up the ramp, Puit would call out from her yard, her voice carrying clearly. Do be careful, Mrs. Shelton. That ramp looks so terribly unstable. Wouldn't want any accidents, would we? Such a shame to have these contraptions ruining our lovely streetscape. Her words were couched in feigned concern, but the underlying venom was unmistakable. Sarah, usually resilient, found herself growing increasingly anxious, her sense of safety in her own home eroded by Puit's constant menacing presence. Lily, too, began to show signs of the strain. She became more reluctant to use the ramp if she knew Puit was nearby, her natural ebullience dimmed by the older woman's persistent hostility. Does Mrs. Puit hate me, Daddy? She'd asked Tom one evening, her voice small, her eyes troubled. The question was a fresh stab to Tom's heart. No, sweetie, of course not. He'd lied, hating himself for it. Mrs. Puit is just a bit particular about how things look. It has nothing to do with you. You are perfect, and that ramp helps you be the amazing independent girl you are. But he knew Lily wasn't entirely convinced. The poison of Puit's animosity was seeping into their lives, tainting their peace. Tom considered taking further legal action, perhaps a restraining order, but Puit was clever. Her actions, while deeply malicious, often skirted the edge of provable harassment. The planters could have been moved by anyone. Her stares and comments, while unpleasant, were hard to quantify legally. He installed a high-definition security camera overlooking their front yard and ramp, hoping it would deter her or capture more concrete evidence. Puit, noticing the camera, merely sniffed disdainfully and continued her campaign perhaps a little more circumspectly, but no less relentlessly. She even tried to get the HOA to pass a rule against intrusive private security cameras, an effort that failed when other residents, also weary of her overreach, quietly resisted. The midpoint twist. The revelation that shifted the entire dynamic and exposed the potential depths of Janice Pruitt's motivations came from an unexpected source, a disgruntled former HOA board member named Arthur Jenkins. Jenkins, an elderly retiree who had recently moved out of Oakwood Hills to live closer to his grandchildren, had served as treasurer under Puit for a year before resigning in disgust. He contacted Tom after hearing through the neighborhood grapevine about the ongoing harassment the Sheltons were enduring. Captain Shelton Jenkins said, his voice raspy over the phone, "I need to tell you something about Janice Pruitt. Something you should know. She's not just a power-hungry busybody, she's a crook, or trying to be." Jenkins then laid out a startling story. Puit, he explained, had been secretly negotiating with a commercial developer, a company called Pinnacle Group Holdings, to sell a large parcel of land that included her own property and several adjacent lots, including the Sheltons. The deal was contingent on Puit delivering all the specified lots cleared and ready for redevelopment into luxury townhouses. The offer from Pinnacle was substantially above market value, a potential windfall for Puit. Most of the other homeowners involved were elderly and had already agreed or were easily pressured to sell. The Sheltons, with their younger family and their clear intention to stay represented by Lily's ramp, were the primary holdouts, the main obstacle to Pruitt's lucrative deal. "She's been trying to make your life hell," Captain Jenkins concluded, "because she wants your house. She needs your lot to complete the package for Pinnacle. That ramp to her is a symbol that you're not leaving. She's desperate. There's a deadline on the Pinnacle offer, and I hear it's approaching fast. She was trying to use HOA funds under the guise of neighborhood improvement initiatives to subtly pressure or buy out reluctant residents, but I blocked her when I was treasurer. That's why I resigned." She was furious. Suddenly, Pruitt's obsessive, irrational behavior made a terrifying kind of sense. It wasn't just about aesthetics or a petty dislike of the ramp. It was about money, a lot of money, and her willingness to go to extreme lengths to get it. Lily's ramp wasn't just an eyesore to Puit. It was a direct threat to her financial ambitions. This revelation cast Pruitt's harassment in a far more sinister light. She wasn't just a neighborhood bully. She was a potentially ruthless opportunist. Tom thanked Jenkins, his mind reeling. He discreetly used his law enforcement contacts to do a background check on Pinnacle Group Holdings. They were a legitimate, if aggressive, development company known for pushing hard to acquire land for their projects. There was no direct evidence linking Puit financially to them beyond Jenkins's claims, but her desperation to get them to move, combined with this new information, painted a chilling picture. The stakes had just been raised considerably. Pruitt's desperation seemed to escalate as the alleged deadline for her deal with Pinnacle Group Holdings approached. Her minor acts of sabotage and intimidation had failed to make the Sheltons budge. The ramp, Lily's symbol of independence, remained. Tom noticed Puit becoming more agitated, her surveillance more overt, her comments to Sarah when she dared to make them sharper, more venomous. A week before the electrocution incident, Puit had made one last desperate attempt through official channels. She had called an emergency HOA meeting, ostensibly, to discuss urgent safety concerns regarding unpermitted electrical modifications to exterior structures. Her target clearly was the optional outdoor lighting Tom had installed along the ramp for enhanced visibility for Lily at night. A low-voltage, professionally installed system that was perfectly safe and code-compliant. Puit, however, armed with blurry photographs and wild exaggerations, tried to paint it as a dangerous jury-rigged fire hazard. Tom, an expert in electrical safety, had calmly and methodically dismantled her arguments at the meeting, pointing out the low-voltage nature of the system, the safety certifications of the components, and Pruitt's utter lack of electrical knowledge. He even offered to have a city electrical inspector verify its safety, an offer Puit quickly dismissed. Frustrated and publicly humiliated by Tom's composed expertise, Puit had adjourned the meeting abruptly, her face a mask of cold fury. It was after this public defeat Tom now realized that she must have decided to take matters into her own, far more dangerous hands. If she couldn't legislate the ramp away or bully them into removing it, she would make it unusable, terrifyingly so. Her method, as Tom pieced it together later with his team, was appallingly reckless. Under the cover of darkness, likely the night before the incident, she had run a thin, insulated wire from the junction box of her own seldom-used backyard floodlight, a 120-volt line. She'd threaded this wire along the shared property line fence, concealed amongst overgrown ivy, then across a small section of her lawn, burying it superficially before finally running it under the cover of a dense azalea bush that abutted the Sheltons' porch near the ramp. From there, she had stripped the insulation from the end of the wire and wedged it into a crevice on the underside of the aluminum ramp, creating a direct live connection. The ramp itself, grounded through its supports, wouldn't normally carry a current unless something, or someone, completed the circuit by touching it and a ground simultaneously, or by touching 2 points of differing potential on the ramp itself if the energizing contact was poor. Lily, by gripping both handrails, had done just that. Puit, in her ignorance or malice, had turned Lily's ramp into an electric chair. The immediate aftermath of Lily's electrocution was a maelstrom of controlled chaos and raw emotion. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Sarah, her face ashen, confirmed she'd hit the main breaker, cutting all power to their house, though Tom knew the illicit wire to the ramp was likely on Pruitt's circuit, not theirs. He continued CPR, his rhythm steady, his mind a desperate prayer, until the paramedics skidded to a halt at the curb. They took over Lily's care with swift professionalism, an oxygen mask quickly placed over her small face. IV lines started her still form strapped to a backboard. As they loaded her into the ambulance, Tom's gaze met Sarah's. Terror, grief, and a shared, unspoken understanding passed between them. Sarah climbed into the ambulance beside Lily. Tom watched it speed away, lights flashing, sirens screaming, a piece of his soul tearing away with it. Then Captain Tom Shelton, the electrical safety expert, took over from Tom Shelton, terrified father. He pulled on the emergency dielectric gloves he always kept in his car. He located the thin, almost invisible wire Pruitt had used, his eyes tracing its deadly path back towards her property. Using insulated cutters, he severed it near the ramp, then carefully coiled the energized end, ensuring it couldn't make further contact. He then moved to the junction box of his own porch, light the one Pruitt had falsely accused of being hazardous, and quickly confirmed it was, as he knew, perfectly safe, completely unrelated to the live wire on the ramp. The source of the lethal current was not on his property. His team, alerted by his initial call to dispatch about a critical electrical hazard involving a child, began to arrive. Sergeant Miles Corbin, his second-in-command, a grizzled veteran with an unerring eye for detail, was first on the scene. Captain Corbin said, his voice grim, taking in the ramp, the severed wire, the grim set of Tom's jaw. "What have we got?" "Attempted murder." Miles Tom said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion he couldn't afford to show. "Our perpetrator is Janice Pruitt, house number 217. The wire originates from her property. I want a full forensic sweep here. Secure the ramp, photograph everything. Then we get a warrant and we go over Pruitt's place with a fine-tooth comb. I want the wire, the tools she used, any scraps of insulation, everything." While part of his team meticulously processed the scene at the ramp, Tom, accompanied by Corbin and 2 uniformed officers, walked the 3 houses down to Janice Pruitt's residence. She was in her front yard tending her roses, her expression one of serene, almost performative calm. She looked up as they approached, feigning mild surprise. "Captain Shelton," she said, her voice cool. "Is there a problem? I heard sirens earlier. I do hope your little girl is all right. Such a worry having children prone to accidents." Tom's control almost snapped. "Mrs. Pruitt," he said, his voice dangerously low, "my daughter was just severely electrocuted by her wheelchair ramp, a ramp that appears to have been deliberately energized by a wire leading directly from your property." Pruitt's eyes widened in exaggerated shock. "My property, Captain? That's a slanderous accusation. I would never. Perhaps your own wiring is faulty. I've said before that those lights you installed looked unsafe." "My wiring is perfectly safe, Mrs. Pruitt, as you well know. We're obtaining a warrant to search your property to trace the source of that wire. However, if you'd like to cooperate now, it might be in your best interest." Pruitt drew herself up, her face hardening into a mask of indignation. "Cooperate with this? This baseless harassment, absolutely not. You'll not set foot on my property without a warrant, Captain, and when this is all over, I shall be speaking to my lawyer about your defamatory accusations. She turned her back on them and stalked into her house, slamming the door. She's confident, Corbin muttered. Or stupid, both Tom said. Let's get that warrant. The warrant was expedited thanks to Tom's position and the clear and present danger the situation had posed. While they waited, news came from the hospital. Lily was alive, stabilized, but unconscious. She had suffered significant electrical burns to her hands and feet, and the doctors were concerned about potential neurological damage and cardiac complications. Sarah was with her, a frantic, terrified sentinel. Armed with the warrant, Tom and his team returned to Pruitt's house. She refused to open the door, so they made a forced entry. Pruitt, her face a mask of fury, screamed about her rights, her lawyer, her standing in the community. Tom ignored her, directing his team. The wire was easy to trace. It led, as Tom had suspected, from her backyard floodlight junction box, where fresh tool marks and recently disturbed earth were evident. In her garden, shed hidden beneath a pile of fertilizer bags, they found a spool of the same thin, black, insulated wire, a pair of wire cutters, and electrical tape. Crucially, they also found a pair of heavy rubber gardening gloves, the kind that might offer some protection against electric shock if one were careless or ignorant enough to work with live wires. On the gloves and on the wire cutters were microscopic traces of aluminum shavings, consistent with having been used to strip or attach a wire to Lily's ramp. In Pruitt's home office, they found printouts from websites detailing how to deter pests with electric fences and, more chillingly, effects of electric shock on humans. They also found copies of the Pinnacle Group Holdings development proposal, with highlighted sections indicating the urgency of acquiring all necessary lots, and a calendar with a date circled in red, just 2 weeks away, labeled Pinnacle Deadline Final. The motive was starkly, damningly clear. The climax of the confrontation came not at Pruitt's house, but later that evening, at an emergency HOA meeting she herself had demanded be called before she knew the extent of the evidence against her. She had intended to use it as a platform to decry the harassment by Captain Shelton, to paint herself as the victim, and to perhaps even blame the Sheltons for the accident due to their supposedly faulty ramp lighting. The community center was packed the air thick with tension, rumor, and fear. Pruitt, looking flustered but defiant, was attempting to control the narrative, her voice shrill, when Tom Shelton walked in, flanked by Sergeant Corbin and 2 city police officers. "Mrs. Pruitt." Tom said, his voice cutting through her tirade, calm, authoritative, and utterly cold. "This meeting is adjourned." He paused as a hush fell over the room. "Janice Pruitt, you are under arrest for the attempted homicide of Lily Shelton. You are also charged with aggravated assault, reckless endangerment, and multiple violations of the city electrical safety code." Pruitt stared, her mouth agape, her carefully constructed composure shattering like brittle glass. "Attempted homicide. This is insane. I am a respected member of this community. You can't." "We can, and we are," Tom said. He nodded to Corbin, who stepped forward and began to read Pruitt her rights. The residents of Oakwood Hills watched in stunned silence as Janice Pruitt, their formidable feared HOA president, was handcuffed and led away her protests, dissolving into incoherent, panicked babbling. The reign of terror on Sycamore Drive was over. The aftermath was a long, slow journey towards healing for Lily, for the Shelton family, and for the fractured community of Oakwood Hills. Lily spent 2 weeks in the hospital. She had second-degree burns on her hands and the soles of her feet where the current had exited her body. Miraculously, her heart had sustained no permanent damage, and a battery of neurological tests showed no lasting cognitive impairment, though she faced months of physical therapy to regain full use of her hands. The emotional scars, however, were deeper. She developed a fear of the ramp, of anything electrical, her bright spirit shadowed by the trauma. But Lily was a fighter. With the unwavering support of her parents, dedicated therapists, and an outpouring of love from friends and even strangers who had heard her story, she slowly began to reclaim her courage. Janice Pruitt's trial was a local sensation. The evidence against her was overwhelming: the physical evidence from her property, the damning internet search history, the clear financial motive revealed by the Pinnacle Group Holdings deal, which collapsed spectacularly upon her arrest, and the testimony of Arthur Jenkins. Her lawyer's attempts to portray her as a misunderstood community servant concerned only with safety and aesthetics were systematically dismantled by the prosecution. Pruitt was found guilty of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, electricity, reckless endangerment, and numerous lesser charges. While the attempted homicide charge was difficult to prove intent for to the highest degree, the judge, citing her callous disregard for a child's life and her egregious abuse of her position, sentenced her to a substantial prison term. Her assets were frozen, and a significant portion was awarded to the Sheltons in a civil suit to cover Lily's ongoing medical care and emotional distress. Her grand house on Sycamore Drive was eventually sold to satisfy her debts and legal obligations. The Oakwood Hills HOA underwent a radical transformation. The old board resigned in disgrace, and a new one was elected, comprised of residents committed to fostering a genuine community, one that valued people over petty rules and aesthetics. One of their first acts was to formally apologize to the Shelton family and to pass a new bylaw explicitly protecting the rights of disabled residents to necessary accommodations, ensuring such a travesty could never happen again. The ramp, once a symbol of contention, became a symbol of resilience. After the police investigation concluded, neighbors from Sycamore Drive, organized by a repentant former ally of Pruitt's, volunteered their time and resources to have it professionally inspected, cleaned, and subtly enhanced with beautiful non-obstructive safety lighting and flowers planted alongside it, not by HOA decree, but as a gesture of solidarity and support for Lily. Tom Shelton returned to his duties as captain of the Electrical Safety Police with a renewed sense of purpose, his personal ordeal a stark reminder of the importance of his work. He spearheaded new public awareness campaigns about the dangers of DIY electrical work and the critical need for vigilance against hazards. Months later, on a warm spring afternoon, Lily Shelton, her hands still bearing faint scars, but her smile, as radiant as ever, wheeled herself down her ramp, her laughter echoing through a neighborhood that had finally found its heart. She was on her way to a community picnic, an event organized by the new HOA, a celebration of unity and a fresh start. Tom and Sarah watched her go, their hearts filled with a profound, quiet gratitude. The storm had passed. The darkness had been confronted and overcome, and in its place, light and hope and the simple, joyful sound of a child's laughter reclaimed.